the star witness, took his turn on the stand on the 6th day of the trial, Monday, the 28th of June, 1915.
Dr. Spilsbury, supposing a person taking a bath fainted, would the breathing, respiration go on?
To a certain extent.
Can you give us any opinion at all as to what would be the result if the face was submerged whilst in a faint? Would the water would come into the mouth?
Yes, and it would pass down into the windpipe.
And what effect would that have?
It would have a very powerful, smarting effect, and would probably recover the person from the faint.
Now, if that person had in fact been conscious and then was suddenly submerged, would there be a shock to the system?
Yes, if it were unexpected. It might, even if it were expected.
And if a shock were received due to a sudden submersion, would consciousness be kept or would that be lost?
That would be lost at once.
You mean immediately after submersion?
Yes.
Or almost immediately?
Actually, immediately.
Thank you, Doctor.
In the trial, they explained that it is possible to drown in a bath if somebody's feet are pulled up from behind.
Spilsbury developed the theory that the baths that they were shown were too short, and if the body had gone rigid, then the body would not have gone below the water.
A woman police officer acted as a demonstration of this at the trial.
Spilsbury nearly drowned her because what he did, he lifted her legs very suddenly and pushed the head down, and she lost all consciousness almost straight away, and she had to be given artificial respiration.
That was a very graphic demonstration which actually showed the method that George Joseph Smith had employed.
Smith was defended by one of the greats of the day, the theatrical barrister Edward Marshall Hall, but even Marshall Hall found this case difficult. His early attempts to stop evidence relating to the deaths of Alice Burnham and Margaret Lofty being heard were unsuccessful.
Edward Marshall Hall, the defence barrister, quite a flamboyant man, had very good at persuading juries that there was an element of doubt and so on. And a very good sort of legal mind as well, and one of these sort of prominent lawyers of his age.
Marshall Hall was known as the great defender. His party piece in the trials was to use the scales of justice. He would stand there and one arm would go up and one would go down, and this was how he would argue his case.
So if you had Marshall Hall defending you, then that was a great reassurance, and he would do his best for you in the highest tradition of barristers.
George Joseph Smith himself never came to the stand. Marshall Hall produced a note which showed that his client did not want to give evidence. But the great defender was hoping he could pick holes in Spilsbury's argument.
Dr. Spilsbury, epilepsy is a very difficult subject. It has varied symptoms.
Yes, it has.
And of course, they can be extremely varied in degree.
Yes.
May I take it that many people have suffered from a very modified form of epilepsy, a very modified form of attack, without being epileptics?
Yes.
Have you known of women washing their hair in the bath?
Yes.
If you're in the bath and using soap, you cannot get the soap out of your hair very well by simply rinsing it with that same soapy water, can you?
No.
The very natural thing for a lady to do then would be to lean forward, put her head under the tap, and let the fresh, clear water run on her head.
That would be one method.
Assuming a woman had had a fairly hot bath, and she was not in a very healthy condition, that is the evidence we've got. And she were rinsing her hair in this way and had a sudden fainting fit, would she not fall?
The theory put forward by Marshall Hall was dismissed by Spilsbury, and although technically possible, it did nothing to convince the jury of George Joseph Smith's innocence. Overall, it was Bernard Spilsbury's brilliant mind and the dogged determination of Arthur Neal which would prove decisive. Marshall Hall's theatrical brilliance and flights of fancy failed to save this client. The jury retired on the 30th of June, 1915, and took just 20 minutes to decide George Smith's fate. George Joseph Smith was executed at Maidstone Prison on the 13th of August, 1915. He did leave behind his only legal wife, Caroline Thornhill, whom he had married in 1898. The day after Smith's execution, she married a Canadian soldier. The case of George Joseph Smith and the brides in the bath would remain in the British public consciousness long after the end of World War I, and his horrifying story would be brought back into focus at the start of World War II. In 1939, Harold Nicolson, a well-known politician, published a best-selling book entitled Why Britain is at War, in which he likened the actions of Adolf Hitler in Europe to the modus operandi of George Joseph Smith. World War II would also see the involvement of the man who'd helped convict Smith, Dr. Bernard Spilsbury. His forensic skills and knowledge of pathology were harnessed in a top-secret mission called Operation Mincemeat, which succeeded in deceiving Nazi forces and saving numerous Allied lives. In the interwar years, though, Spilsbury had testified in many other sensational trials.
Bernard Spilsbury had this very eminent role in giving evidence in so many murder cases.
Between the Crippen case and 1947, when he died, he did something like 21,000 post-mortems.
The defence would say, well, if Spilsbury is appearing for the other side, we don't really stand a chance. In modern terms, he would probably be criticised for giving his own personal opinion perhaps a little bit too strongly. And there are some cases where the evidence could have been interpreted either way. But he was a man of his time.
He helped to convict poisoners such as Herbert Armstrong and Jean-Pierre Vaquier. But his method of working would be brought into question.
He undoubtedly helped to convict and establish the truth of many, many high-profile cases.
He lived until 1947. Two of his sons had died, and he was suffering from overwork.
Eventually, he went to his laboratory and cleared up all his paperwork and then quietly committed suicide. A very sad end to a very fine career.
It may have been a very tragic end for Bernard Spilsbury, but he left behind a tremendous legacy in the field of forensic science and criminal investigation, and his monumental efforts had brought down one of the nation's most cold-hearted murderers, George Joseph Smith. Later in the century, he'd probably be classified as a psychopath, a man who acted without qualm or scruple, but who nevertheless exercised great personal charm. But there was no such word for a man like Smith in 1915. He viciously exploited the iniquitous position of women in society for his own ends. The suffragette movement did help remedy some of the many problems that women faced in this era, and the outbreak of war led to all prisoners who were locked up for suffragette activities being released in amnesty. The First World War was altering society, ushering women into the workplace and later into the political world as well. But although their legal status did improve, it would be a long time before the role of women in society changed sufficiently for them to no longer be such easy victims for the likes of George Joseph Smith, the brides in the bath killer. The old morality and rigidity of pre-war days was not swept away by the carnage of the trenches, but would continue to affect the fate of women for decades to come.